Welcome to our talk. We discovered that there's a demand to know why we model language and what models are for real. We discovered that all of us in this department don't really can not really wrap their minds around why exactly we do this. So we asked Dr. Ümit Atlamaz to give us a talk to elevate our existential crisis, and we hope that we can generate an answer to our question. Yeah.
So, thank you very much for this kind invitation. This is my second talk at BULING, I guess, during my tenure, so I'm very honored to be here. I also learned about the topic 2 days ago, so I tried to put something together. I actually also learned that I have to give a presentation because we were like, let's chat. So here are the slides that I completed roughly about 17 minutes ago. Take it with a grain of salt. Or pepper. What else do I want to say? Thank you very much for coming. I guess there's people from Boğaziçi and also other universities. I know that some people from Istanbul University wanted to join us. Are they here? Hello, welcome. Or did they go to Kuzey Campus? I don't know. All right, so let's get started. As I promised, this lecture is going to be about thermodynamics.
Wonderful.
I am serious. But I guess we have to ask ourselves, maybe the first question that I want to start with is essentially, we're modeling language in various ways. And I guess the first question is, what is scientific modeling? Because linguistics is a branch of science, and whatever kind of modeling that we're doing here is essentially supposed to align with scientific modeling. So what do we mean by modeling? But I guess even before that, I, for example, have been for a long time confused about the next question, which is what's a theory and what is a model? So what's the difference between these two? And often people use them interchangeably. So can we define them before we dive any further? And really, a theory is just an explanation of the world. And when I mean the world, I mean everything in the universe, everything in the physical universe, so to speak. So the goal is to observe some phenomena and try to explain how things work and why they work in this particular way. What is take this one? You can take this one. I'm not going to say it. How they work and why they work this way, but not some other way. That's the explanatory theory. A model, on the other hand, is essentially some sort of a simulation of reality within a particular theory. Right? So, and if we want to take a closer look at this, the purpose of scientific modeling is to essentially observe some phenomena and describe it. And after that description, we want to understand how it works by virtue of simulating it and building something that looks like it. Right? So it involves a certain level of abstraction. Right? So you're abstracting away from the physical world and you're just describing something that looks like it. That's what a model is, or that's what scientific modeling is. Right? So it's again, it's an abstract, simplified representation of reality. And these are two models of our beautiful South Campus. So this is a very detailed model of the South Campus. This is essentially a photo that has been taken by one of the Google satellites. In addition, there's a bunch of text around here that tells us where things are and where we should be going. It's essentially a description. But notice that this is not the South Campus. This is just a two-dimensional picture of it. The South Campus is right there. We can go hang out after the talk. And this is another model off the South Campus. And obviously you see that there's a lot less detail, a lot less clutter. But also, this is probably something that I would use if I were trying to navigate around rather than this one, because I don't want to get lost in the trees. What I really need is whether Garanti BBVA is next to Rektörlük binası or not, and it's actually not. So this is a wrong model. Cool, that's essentially a model. But what does a good model do? We could build many models, and anytime we're modeling something, you should realize that all models are essentially wrong. Why are they wrong? Because models are trying to represent the reality, and models are not the reality themselves. So they're always going to be off by some threshold or some certain degree. So all models are wrong, but some of them are useful and some of them are good models. What does a good model do? A good model serves a theory. A good model allows us to understand reality. And it helps us explain how things work. Essentially, what are the core building blocks of what we're looking at? If we're looking at language, what are the core building blocks of language? If we're looking at understanding how the planets move, what are the core building blocks of the planetary motion? Right? And what are the core building blocks? How do they work together? And why do they work this way but not some other way? Right? What are the constraints? If we could answer these questions, it means we know a lot about what we are interested in, and a model that helps us figure that out is a good model. And when you have a good model, you get some superpowers, and those superpowers are essentially predicting what's next. In a given scenario, if you have a good model, your model will tell you what to expect. So predictions is essentially something that we're after. For obviously money purposes. So why are we modeling it? As I mentioned, reality is too complex. There are too many variables out there that actually do not matter to understand some phenomenon. So we get rid of some of these variables that are not relevant to us. Most of the time these variables are random. They're not relevant or interesting to what we want to really understand. So we build models. And there are too many complex phenomena in the universe that we all want to understand as humans, right? So for example, for a long time, people wanted to understand the planetary motion. How do planets work? Does the Earth revolve around the sun, or does the sun revolve around the Earth? At a certain level, this is just for curiosity. You know, you look out there and it's like, okay, that bright thing is here today and there that day. Why? Right, so that itch in the human nature is pushing us to learn things. And ever since we have existed, we have always wanted to learn things. We're curious. And that's one of the main pushing dynamic behind trying to understand planetary motion. But not only that, right? What do we gain by understanding planetary motion? Well, we understand the seasons better. We understand when we should start planting our seeds, when we shouldn't be doing that. We understand many other real concrete phenomena that help us improve our lives. Another thing that I will be talking about today is heat and fire. How does fire work? Or something extremely complex that we all kind of have. The brain, right? It's a massively complex object. Hello. You can take this chair if you want.
No, thanks.
Go ahead.
No, you can sit here.
Here. And next person can sit on this.
Yeah.
Or they can dance with me. I hope I don't forget it. Oh, yeah. You got this. All right, so ultimately we want to understand the brain as linguists and as cognitive scientists amongst us. But let's get take a look at how we can model these things, right? So let's start with this very simple model. You know, you're out there, you have come to this world, and at some point you feel cold. Some of us are feeling cold, right? So, and here's the question: how do we heat ourselves or our food? Well, it looks like at some point people figured that if they light a fire, they can warm up, and they can also cook meat, which gets better by cooking, and that's good. Do we understand how fire works? Well, in a sense, yeah, of course. You know, you light it up, you warm up, you cook your food, and then you go back to your cave to sleep. You can actually bring some of that into your cave too. So in a sense, this is a model of how fire works. Is this a sufficient model? That depends. That precisely depends on what you want from your fire model to give you. I'd be very happy with this model, by the way. That's all I want. But here in comes the curious weirdo, i.e. the scientist, and starts asking weird questions and says, okay, why are some objects hot and others cold? Right, so why is fire hot but ice is cold? And they start digging around, right? So they start digging around and they realize that, you know, everything is made of atoms. Everything that we touch, everything that we see or maybe not see, they're made of atoms, including ourselves. And atoms jiggle, right? So this is actually a Richard Feynman lecture. Atoms jiggle. What does jiggle mean? It means they just move around, right? So they bounce around. You could grab a chair from the other room, maybe. And so if you take a look at these atoms jiggling, the faster they jiggle, the warmer they are. And the slower they jiggle, they get cold. Did you know this fact? Yes. Congratulations. There you go. You don't need this lecture then. But why do atoms jiggle? You ask the next question. So it appears that atoms are very little material that are densely packed together because there are forces that pull them together, and there are also forces that push them from each other. Right? So this constant pulling and pushing is causing the atoms to jiggle. All right. So that's how atoms work. So now the question is the following. If jiggling is all about heat, and if we speed that pulling and pushing direction, what happens? Well, obviously the heat goes up, right? And when atoms start jiggling more violently, right, when they're faster, remember there's many atoms walking around, they're going to hit each other violently. And what happens when two objects hit each other violently? They start falling apart. Right? So then at some point they start breaking apart. So here's an atom, here's another atom. They hit each other and then sometimes they break. Right? Now, that's good. Now assume that you're back in the cave now and you're just using two sticks and rubbing them together to heat up. What are you doing? Well, what you're essentially doing is that our muscles, right, there's energy in our muscles. It allows us to move around. So this is a mechanical force. That mechanical energy, as you rub the sticks together, right, sticks have bumps on them, they have tissue on them, right, so as you're rubbing them against each other, two things happen. You essentially force these atoms in that touching points to move around. And as they move around, right, they lose their shapes, they start breaking, and they start colliding. And they start breaking into pieces. So this increase in random direction right now, just two sticks hitting each other and the pieces coming apart, etc., it gets translated into heat because what's happening, they're getting jiggling faster, right? And what happens if you keep rubbing? Well, if you keep rubbing, that little area where the two touch, it's going to keep getting warmer because of the jiggling motion. In addition, remember when they hit each other, they're going to start falling apart. When they fall apart, there's flammable material inside them. And then that flammable material, when it combines with the oxygen in the air, at a certain point of temperature, all of a sudden, it starts catching fire. What is fire? Well, fire is just a chemical reaction where some flammable material reacts with oxygen and that burns. What that means is that they start hitting each other, and once they start burning, they go and hit the other atoms, and it goes on like that. It's an infinite loop, right? So that's how essentially we make fire, right? So now here's another question. We light up some fire over there, and we're just sitting here, and we start feeling warm. Why?
This wasn't a rhetorical question?
If you want to give me an answer, you can give me an answer.
The jiggling atoms touch the nerves that detect them, and they give you the perception.
Part of it, right? So essentially what happens is that once you start the fire, there's a lot of jiggling going on there. But not only that, there's energy in the wood, right? There's some energy stored in the wood. Where does the energy come from? It's in the atomic bonds, right? Atoms have a lot of strong energy concentration in there. And when the oxidation happens, right, when fire burns, what happens is that the chemical structure of the material changes. So the densely packed energy material in that wood is turned into some other kind of material where there's less energy. It loses some of its energy. But energy doesn't get lost. Where does it go? It goes around. Right? So some of the particles in the fire, they will come and hit you, and that material is going to make your body jiggle. And once your body jiggles, you start feeling heat. That's one. In addition, there's some other material. There's radiation, which brings you heat and so on and so forth. But essentially, all of this weird heating thing is happening because the goddamn atoms are jiggling. And if we can jiggle them, they will come and tickle us. No, they will come and warm us up, right? So, look, we had two models earlier. Back in the day, we wanted to get warmer. We would just light a fire. Now we want to understand how heat works and how fire works and everything. To do what? To get warm? They're both models of explaining or simulating how the world works. You want to heat up, you light a fire, or jiggle the atoms, you rub stuff, you bring oxygen, you all do all of that to do what? To heat up. Now these are two models, and then the question is, which one is a better model? It appears that the second one is actually a better model in the sense that it helps us understand the process in a way deeper fashion. And what happens when we understand something truly? It looks like we can control it. Believe it or not, by virtue of understanding how the fire works, we're able to build something very interesting. Refrigerators. How? Well, as we were trying to understand, as the human species trying to understand how heat is transferred from one point to the other, we figured that once you have heat somewhere, heat is trying to go to areas that is cold. Why? Why?
Energy spread.
Energy spreads. Energy in a particular position, right? So is going to go and try to jiggle everything else. But as that jiggling is spreading, their energy levels become lower. And so you go from hot to cold. So then the transfer is unidirectional. If you're hot, you become cold. Hot material is going to go to the cold material and bring up its temperature a little bit. Okay? But that's not what we want with refrigerators. What do we want with refrigerators? We want the opposite. We want the refrigerator to keep cold. How do we do that? We're going to push heat out. How do we do that? Well, we're not going to build refrigerators, so we don't have to talk about it. But essentially the way you do it is that you take some gas, you put it into the chamber, into the fridge, right? That gas is cold. Your food is warm or warmer. And so the warmth is transferred into the gas. What do you do with that gas?
You expand.
You bring it back into the back of your fridge. You compress it. There's a compressor back there. It squeezes it. What happens when you squeeze atoms? They jiggle. Once they jiggle, they become warm, right? And then you send it back through the back of the fridge. If you've seen those old fridges, you see that there's some metal in the back, like this big thing. You spread around there. What happens? It touches the room temperature. So the room gets warmer. And as that energy is dropped outside, what is left behind is cold. Right? So then heat is essentially the average amount of jiggling in your atoms. Look at all that. Allah'ın işi işte. Right? So we've understood all of that by being a caveman and looking at some fire to get warm. But then some curious weirdo comes and says, well, how is all this working? And then we built the refrigerator. Now, the curious question is essentially this, right? So how long did it take for us to understand all this damn thing? Now, if you take a look at this, people started controlling fire over 400,000 years ago. 400,000 years ago, like a few years before I was born. Then around 500 BC and a little bit after that, during the Greek philosophers, they wanted to understand what fire is, and they were like, it's just an element. Toprak, su, ateş, tahta. No, not tahta. Ateş. It took people almost another 1,000 years to figure out that, fire is actually not material. It's just a process, right? Whatever happens. And then finally we come to the modern-ish day, roughly about 200 years ago, how many years ago? 26? God damn it. People realized that, what we mean heat is really the motion, the jiggling of atoms. So it roughly took about then 402,000 years. Not that bad. So it looks like on this large scale of timeline of how humans have been interacting with the universe, a very simple fire, right? Understanding that to a certain level of degree, we had to spend so much time, so much energy, some of the most brilliant minds on Earth to focus on this problem, just to model and understand how fire works. Underneath all of this, there's a very simple theory, a very elegant theory of thermodynamics with 4 laws. Once you understand those 4 laws, you build all these massive, interesting things like the air conditioners, the whatever you want, the Kevlars and everything, right? So the entire physics is essentially built on these very principles. So again, which model is better? It depends on what you want to learn from that model, right? So Economically, which model is better? The first or the second? That's actually a very tough question. Because in one case, economically, you can only heat yourself up and cook whatever. On the other hand, you can build all this like massive economy on the modern economy on this very principles of thermodynamics. But how much energy and brain power did you put into it? So it's a tough choice. The second question is, what is its utility? What do I do with this knowledge? Right? I guess most of us are not going to do anything with this knowledge. Being linguists and cognitive scientists, we're like, okay, yeah, there's thermodynamics, so they built refrigerators with it. Good. And again, which one is better in terms of us humans understanding what is going on with the world, and how do we curb our enthusiasm, and how do we learn that, you know, how do we feed that itch of curiosity about the universe, right? This is what we're interested in as scientists. This doesn't mean that we don't want money. We want money, but this is essentially the main drive for many scientists. So why do we study language? You know, it looks like the physicists have solved all the puzzles in the world. Now here's the question. We live in a physical world. And as scientists, we can only rule over the physical world for as long as we understand it and we have the power to control it. We don't know anything about the metaphysical world. That's not what the scientists are interested in. If we assume that everything in this universe is made up of atoms, and if we assume that these atoms have a particular way of coming together to build all this fascinating universe, from black holes, stars, to humans, planets, beetles, nails, and everything, right? If we think of that, then we go all the way up in the chain of things to understand, and we end up with one of the most complicated and sophisticated thing in the universe, the human brain. How do you understand that thing? How do you model that thing? Another question is, should we even bother to model it? But apparently we're just curious and we want to understand it. But let's try to see why we want to study language, or some of us are interested in studying language, right? So back in the day, during the Plato's time, there was this attempt to try to describe what a human is. And Plato was like, you know, human is just a two-legged animal. And this guy, Diogenes, who was from Sinope, was like, how about a rooster? And Plato was like, you know, of course a rooster is not an animal, a human, so a human is a two-legged animal with no feathers. That's what the guy did. He went and plucked a rooster and brought him back and said, how about this guy? Terrible example. Bad. That Plato's definition was, oh, it's a two-legged, featherless animal with flat nails. You know, you're trying to understand. Ultimately, Plato couldn't win. It had to be Aristotle, his disciple, who was like, you know, human is a two-legged animal with language. So that's the key thing that makes us weirdos in this universe.
So it's a speaking rooster.
It's the speaking rooster. If you can bring that to me, I'd love that life, to be honest. You walk around and just speak. Just don't pluck me, okay? So, I don't know. There are advantages to that, too. There's all these waxing technology out there. So, if we take a look at Chomsky, he was interested in this question of, like, you know, when we study language, we're really interested in the human essence. Right? So, that's what he thought we're trying to do. So it looks like language is an interesting phenomenon to investigate. It looks like it's maybe important enough to study and understand from a human point of view. And where is this, right? So if we take a look at the human brain, what do we have in there? We have thinking, whatever it is. We don't fully understand it. There's sight, there's emotion, planning, language, navigation, all of these factors in there. And it looks like as linguists, we're interested in this part, but it's also deeply integrated into the rest of the cognitive faculties and abilities. So how do we figure out a way of understanding this and understanding its relationship to all of these other things? Can we model just this part to understand it, or do we have to model the entire ecosystem? Those are really tough and challenging problems, and some of our smartest brains have been working on them, and we will keep working on them, but let's see what we're doing with it. How do we study language? With fire, we had to understand the atoms, we had to use the microscopes and all of that. And we also had to think about, if everything is built of little pieces and how do we put them together, right? So all of that, the physicists have invented several different ways of analyzing data from the universe and turning it into a theory with a model of how things work. How do we do that with human languages? Well, I guess first we have to decide on what do we want to study, right? Do we all agree on what we mean by language, or should we agree on what we mean by that? So first we have to detect and determine the object of study. The second question that we're interested in is, how does it work? It's always a question of, how does it work, right? And then other questions might follow. How did it come about, right? Why do humans have language but birds don't, or this desk doesn't, and so on and so forth? Can we answer that question? Maybe we won't be able to answer that question ever, but it's worth pursuing. And then obviously, I guess this is one of the questions that Sude really had in mind when she was like, why are we doing all this nonsense? What's the utility of this? Sude is a representative of the linguistic universe. I asked the same question myself too. For me, the answer is very clear. I get paid for it. For you guys, I don't know. I'm just looking. They're hoping to. Many souls have been lost on that battle, but good luck. Good luck. This was supposed to be an encouragement. We'll get there. We'll get there. Well, in the case of fire, it was actually easy. We had this. We're studying fire and heat. How does it work? Well, atoms jiggling faster brings about heat. Everything else follows. You can control it. And it's how did this happen? Well, it just didn't happen. It was just there. The basic physical laws of the universe that we're in, it just creates this, just like it ended up building these bodies too, right? So ideally, we want to understand the basic laws of the linguistic world, if there is such a world. Or maybe we could use jiggling to model language. That would be fun. Let's do that. Against the Chomsky's generativist approach, the jigglist approach. And what's the utility of physics? It helps. It makes our lives better. We can build refrigerators and eat some ice cream. That's actually worth it. Now, how about language? Well, if we take a look at language, what is the object of study? Are we studying the linguistic expressions, like sentences that I produce, you produce, Wikipedia has, and so on and so forth? Are we interested in sounds, signs, words, paragraphs? It looks like language has a very social aspect to it, right? So if you take a look at these words like selam alaikum, or dizzle, or darak, or saygılar, you see that there's a lot of non-linguistic, conventional, cultural elements that has been embedded in those words. Do we study that? Language seems to change, right? Tize reftar olanın payine damen dolaşır. Ziya Paşa. Metin knows this one, I guess. Do you guys know Hababam Sınıfı?
Yeah.
This is from Hababam Sınıfı. And it interacts with thought, decision making. It interacts with our motor cortex, right? So the signals happening in the brain are pushing some buttons so that my mouth moves around, my lungs move around, my hands move around. We jiggle. That's the jiggling theory of language. How do we work on all of these things? Well, does language have any atoms? That's the name of my advisor's book. Atoms of language. And do they jiggle? Well, we essentially need a theory and many models that tries to seek an answer to these questions, right? So we want to have a theory. The theory should be explanatory. It should help us understand and grasp what is happening, right? And then we need to build a model through those theories, or maybe multiple models, that have some predictive power. What do we want to predict about language? Well, we want to predict about what you're going to say when I say something. That's some predictive power. Or maybe I want a bit more power. I want to say certain things so you behave in a particular way. It's a bit of a shady power, but we're exposed to it every day, as we'll see later. Or what happens if I go and tap into somebody's brain and put a bit of a chip there, right? Can I change their language? Right. So these are all the questions that we're actually interested in, and for that we need models. So what is language? Well, if you take a look at language, language is an emergent system, and it's a combination of at least the following components. It's a biological thing. How is it a biological thing? Well, it appears in a biological organism called the speaking rooster, the human, right? It has a social aspect, so a child, for example, born in solitude doesn't seem to be producing language. So there's a social aspect to it. We need multiple humans to see language. And then it has a computational aspect. It all happens in the brain, where brain is just a mush of neurons, I guess, with some electric signals going here and there. Right. So how do we put all of these things together and emerge language or languages out of it? Right. Now, if we take a closer look on what the object of study is, it looks like really a theory of language, an ultimate theory of language, or an ultimate model of language, so to speak, should really be addressing all of these questions and maybe some others that I didn't think about, right? There's a formal aspect to it. What are the possible structures? What are the possible expressions in human languages? What is the limits of my language, right? Can, for example, a human sentence ever have 7 arguments in it? We have intransitive verbs, we have transitive verbs, we have ditransitive verbs. We have another one which we never bothered to name. I bet you $5 that you're not going to know it. There's 5 arguments in there, in that particular sentence. But why don't we have sentences with 7 arguments or 10 arguments? It would be very compact. I could express the entire idea in 1 sentence and go home. Can't do it. Too bad, you're going to have to listen to the rest of the talk unless you want to walk out. So that's the formal structure. We need to understand it. And it's like, why do we use this type of a language but not something completely different? So if you remember this movie, The Arrival, if you've seen it, great. If not, spoiler alert. Close your ears or eyes because I'll have to show it. It looks like our language is essentially some sort of a linear representation. It's a bunch of sounds that are attached to each other, and I output it here and you grasp it there. But if you take a look at The Arrival, it's nothing like that. It doesn't seem to be compositional. It looks like it's just some weird picture that has nothing to do with our language. Why don't we have that as our language? Well, because atoms jiggle and we don't have it. So that's one of the questions. The other question is statistical distribution. Even though many, many, many different types of sentences are possible, actually infinitely many sentences are possible, some of them are more common than the others. Why? Right? Where is that following from? Can we understand that? This happens at many different levels. We use certain words more than the others. The frequency of words in a corpus is Zipfian. What that means is that the most common word in a language is going to be twice as many times as the next word, which is going to be almost twice as many as the next one. And the next one goes down like this, right? Or SOV languages seem to be more common than VSO languages. Why? What are the cognitive constraints? Can we learn this language or that language-like thing? How do we learn language? How is the acquisition happening? There's a language, there's a bunch of people doing blah 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 out there. I'm born into this world, I need to make sense out of it and learn something out of it. There's social variation. People speak in different ways. How do we capture that? Languages change. They evolve over time. They borrow concepts or structures from each other. And all of that has to be modeled, described, put into a machine so that we can take that machine and implement it on the brain or a computer. A brain or the computer. That's what we mean by modeling. If you understand language well enough, if you can describe it as a compact system, then you can implement it in the brain, in a computer, on some sand. It really doesn't matter. At that level of abstraction, that's why we need modeling. We want to understand it independent of the particular implementation tool that we're using. Okay? And that's hard. And the next question is, these are all the kinds of things that an ultimate theory or an ultimate model would call for. And who is doing what kind of modeling? Now, this question is very relevant to us. At this department, for example, we do a lot of modeling. If you go talk to Ömer Demirok, he's going to tell you that he's modeling the meaning of some obscure language called Turkish. Obscure meaning in the universe of all the possible ones. Right, so we humans are tiny little dusts. So that's the kind of modeling that we do. But then if you go out there and talk to the people at the computer science department, they're going to say, oh, we're building models of language. Like, what do you mean? You're not linguists. Don't take our jobs away. Like, no, we're going to do it. So if we take a look at these different sorts of modeling, it looks like there's a phenomenon. It's a very complex phenomenon with many different facets. And you can approach it from very different angles. And it's very hard to model the entire thing, but what you can do is that you can take subcomponents of it and model it. And each one gives us a slightly different understanding. The generative linguist, right? Let's talk about the Chomsky revolution. Chomsky has 2 revolutions. Oftentimes people don't realize this. The first revolution is this understanding that language is not simply data, it's something in the brain. It's a biological element, some sort of a biological computer. That is a fact, okay? That is the biggest contribution of Chomsky's revolution. The second type of revolution Chomsky tried to do, and I think he kind of failed, or maybe not, maybe I'm speaking a little too early, is the particular type of tool, kit, and the models that he's implementing to understand how that biological system works. And obviously, we're all prisoners of our time, right? We cannot know what the time, more than what the current zeitgeist gives us. So he was interested in understanding the structure. Remember that first problem that we have here the formal structure, what is possible and what is not possible. So Chomsky tried to understand that, and he wanted to model that. He didn't want to model sociolinguistics. He didn't want to model the frequency distributions. That's not his goal. We need to understand people's goals and what they're trying to do and evaluate them within that domain. So he thinks that language is grammar. And language is a particular type of phenomenon that has atoms. The atoms of language are words or morphemes or sounds. And there's a particular way in which you can combine them. Some combinations will be good, others will be bad. This is called a grammar. A grammar is a symbolic system that has symbols and some combinatorial rules. And so his assumption was that language is a formal system in the mind. If we understand it, we can simulate it, we can understand how the brain works, we can understand how it's integrated with the other cognitive domains. If you're interested, come work with me. If you're not, go back to the cave, hang out with the fire. Or build a skyscraper and go all the way up top. But that's what I'm doing, so if you want to follow along, follow along. And the goal of modeling is really to understand the range of possible linguistic expressions, nothing more. And he has been the biggest critic of himself, to be honest. And it's a theoretical goal. The ultimate goal is to explain how this finite machine, this is a finite machine. We can actually go in there and count the number of atoms that are in there. They're not many at this time of the day, but they're there. Right? And so he wanted to understand that cognitive system, and how does that finite system generate infinitely many expressions in theory. What do the large language modelers do? They are very popular nowadays, but they have been around for a while. Around the time that Chomsky was building his own revolution, these people were building their own revolution. They started building the perceptron, a simple neuron-like computational element, a model of a neuron, right? That's just the perceptron. It models the real neuron. So once you have a neuron, okay, great. How do you use that neuron? Well, what they noticed is that if you put a bunch of neurons together, just like the brain, a bunch meaning a few billion or trillions, then all of a sudden it starts observing patterns. That's what large language models do. And their goal was the following. The large language modelists, people who are modeling language with statistical information, in the short term, they're not trying to understand the symbolic system in the brain. What they want to do is that they want to take a look at language as data out there. Data is out there, right? You're not born with a language device. You're not born with linguistic information encoded in the brain. There's no universal principles about what is a good expression and what is a bad expression. There's just data out there. People speak, you hear it, right? All you need is something that can learn it, something that can mimic that data, something that can identify patterns and abstract. That looks like language. So instead of using symbols and rules, they use frequency information from text or sound or visual input. They use some neural parameters. Ask me about it later if you're interested. And then they try to learn a probability distribution from some data that can simulate language. So it's a model. And what's the goal of simulating language? Well, the goal is essentially trying to find the right words in the right context. What do I mean by that? If I say hello, hello. In the right context, she was able to say hello. She has an excellent LLM in there. Right? So that's exactly the idea. And they work. You know, ChatGPT does wonders. Claude does wonders. But the ultimate goal ultimate theoretical goal in this type of modeling is that, we want to explain language as an emergent property of data, where there's no symbolic structure, there's no hierarchical structure, nothing. It's just, you put these neurons together, they look at some data, and they learn something from it. And if you take a look at these two goals, it looks like they are slightly different models with slightly different toolkits, with slightly different understanding of how the world works. But if you put them together, combined, they still tell us that, yeah, the brain is a biological organ. Language must be encoded somehow in that biological system. It still has to be learned, and it still has to be simulated. So they're doing more or less the same thing with slightly different sugar coating. All right, so the Chomskyan models are interested in what does the mind contain? What's in there? What's in there that allows us to learn the language? Neural models are interested in what are the patterns that a system can learn from experience? Those are the two different approaches to modeling language. What's the utility of doing all of this, right? So why should we be a linguist? Or why should anyone pay linguists? Well, first of all, Adam Smith told us that not everybody in the society has to work. So some of us work, the others just enjoy the benefits. That's part of it. That's what scientists do, right? So you can't do science when you're hungry. But why do we do all of these things, and what have we achieved, right? So remember, for fire, we had to spend a little more than 500,000 years, or around 500,000 years, to understand how something simpler works. For language, God knows how many years we've been working on it, but we've been working on it for a while as a community of humanity. What have we achieved? Right, so our existential crisis moment. We're looking at this language, we're telling ourselves that, oh, there's an N bar here, and the NP moves around the DP. Okay, so what? Well, it looks like we have to go a little bit outside, remove ourselves from all of this, and leave the forest, the woods, to see what the forest looks like. Right? When you're deep in the woods, you cannot see the forest. And since we don't have a grand unified theory of language yet, we don't have a grand unified model yet, we don't fully appreciate what we have achieved so far and what we might do in the future. Let's take a look at a very simple example from linguistics. It looks like if you take a look at linguistic expressions, there are things that are called scales. Those are linguistic elements. So it looks like some and all, they form a scale. Can and must, they form a scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a billion, they form a scale. And these are all parts of linguistic information, right? So what do scalar implicatures do? I mean, and by the way, this is a model of how the language works, right? This is just a very tiny model about a particular corner. Well, if you take a look at these things, and if you put these general maxims of conversation, which is also another model, we put these things together with a couple other things from psychology, we get to understand how the human mind works. And that's actually interesting, because if we understand it fully, we can control it. And that's what we're going to see people are doing all the time. Not that I want to do it. People are doing it, and actually I'm experiencing it. So here's an example. Some kids went to the party. What does that mean? It's not all kids went to the party. As an implicature. In fact, if some kids went to the party, it's quite possible that all kids went to the party. But this is just an implicature. It just automatically raises. That's how the human mind works, right? So if you were to put this information into a computer that doesn't know implicatures, it wouldn't know. But we as humans know it immediately. If I say, I have 2 brothers, it means I don't have 3 brothers if I'm being cooperative, right? As an implicature. Now here's a job offer. I'm wondering if you want to take the job offer. We offer a competitive compensation package including a performance bonus of up to $5,000 per year. What do you think? A good job or not?
It can be zero.
What?
It can be zero.
You're just the wrong person. Get out. You're not my client. I'm asking the linguist in the room.
Yeah, well, it's probably less than 5,000, but I guess it would be something around 4,000.
Right, but why? Why do you think that? Why do we feel optimistic, right? So if we take a look at this, it looks like there's a very interesting interplay of three different facts about human natural language and human brain. There are scalar implicatures. There are maxims of relevance. When we speak, we assume certain things about how the conversation unfolds. These two are linguistic theory. That's the anchoring effect. This is psychological or psycholinguistic, right? And it's exactly what Ganesh told us, right? So if you just take a look at scalar implicature, you will win. If everybody's a good linguist, we could make better decisions. You know, up to 5,000. If it's up to 5,000, it's not 5,000. It means it's somewhere between 0, 50, 3,000, all up the way up to 5,000. That's one thing. If you want to take a look at the maximum of relevance, the maximum of relevance tells us that, look, people are trying to be cooperative. They want to tell you something. They want to provide information. They mentioned 5,000. It should be something more or less that happens frequently enough that they're mentioning it. Right? So far, so good. It's fine. Then comes in the anchoring effect. What's the anchoring effect? It's exactly what Ganesh told us. If somebody says 5,000, maybe it's not 5,000, but maybe 4,000. That's the intuition. That's the anchoring effect. Okay? For those of you who are not familiar with the anchoring effect, you can think of the following problem. And how many people, if you know the answer for sure, please don't answer it. Like if you know the exact count, don't answer it. How many people do you think are enrolled at Boğaziçi University?
In total?
Total.
Oh, 200,000?
200,000. What do you think?
I know the number.
You don't know. Shut up.
Yeah.
Anybody who doesn't know the number and wants to make a guess?
18,000?
200,000, 18,000? What do you think? What does anybody else think?
200,000 so much.
All right, this experiment failed, by the way. But essentially, the idea is that, you know,
Around? Do you want the around word?
yes,
Around 16,000?
that's the actual answer.
Is it?
Is it?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. 16 to
There we go.
20. Oh,
So you nailed it. But apparently the idea is this, with anchoring effect. When you're trying to guess something, if somebody puts an anchor there, right, if somebody gives you a price, then you go around that number, irregardless of whether you're miles and miles and miles off, or if you're close. Right? So that's the anchoring effect. So you combine all these three factors, and what do you do with the job offer?
Let's not rely on HR guys.
Sen feleğin çemberinden kaçtılar. We take the job. That's what normal people do. So the point here is that it looks like this particular psychological effect is actually a linguistic effect. And we can actually predict people's behavior through our linguistic modeling of how language works. And we can actually model their behavior, change their behavior with it. It happens all the time. Here's another example. Shut up. Sorry, just kidding. A new medical treatment is available for a serious illness. This treatment has a 10% mortality rate. Would you take it or not? Who says yes?
What is the mortality rate of the illness?
Right. That's the good question.
I don't know. It's a serious illness. Who would not take it? All right. Cool.
It depends on
A new medical treatment is available for has a 90% survival rate. Would you take it or not?
I mean, I would still take it.
So the point is that this is a framing problem. Okay? And it's purely linguistic. Depending on how you frame the same thing, right? In both cases, the survival rate is 90%, the mortality rate is 10%. But if you present the green number, people have been shown to choose that option over the other one. We don't make decisions based on facts.
Yeah. Did you see the red and blue button test on? Yeah, exactly.
So it looks like all of this is happening because linguistic expressions have certain negative and positive sentiments associated with them, and how you frame things impacts people's behavior. Was Chomsky ever interested in this? No, he didn't give a damn, because he was interested in a particular type of modeling language. But this is modeling language too. And if you have a good model of how people react, then you can make a lot of money in the advertisement business. Here's a very interesting case that happened in the United States, and the fight continued for about 30 years. They even put a law in action. So once banks invented credit cards, they gave them to their customers, right? And so normally, if you do a regular transaction, right, you're selling something, I am buying, what do? I give you the price. What happens when the bank comes in? The middleman. And they're not going to do it for free. No, bankers are definitely not going to do things for free. What's going to happen? Somebody will have to pay the bank, right? And now who pays for the bank? Does the customer pay for the bank? Or does the retailer pay for the bank? Somebody has to pay for that price, right? So no free lunch. So what happens is that they noticed that when a customer comes to buy something, what the retailers wanted to do, they didn't want to pay for the money. They didn't want to put it on the banks didn't want to take that over. They were like, okay, cash, regular price. If you want to pay with a card, I have to apply a 5% surcharge. Fair. If you want to use a card, you have to pay for the price. This happens all the time in Turkey, no? Go and try to buy something with the card from Ali Bey, the kiosk on in the South Campus. If you're lucky, he will be nicer. You know what the banks tried to do? They wanted to pass a law that forbids this. Because what this means, that customers, once they see this, they don't want to pay for this. They want that option. This means banks can't sell credit cards. This means they can't make much money. What did they push for? Here's what they pushed for. Let's raise the price for everyone. And if they pay with the card, it's regular price. If they want to pay in cash, they can get a 5% discount. And you know what happens? Everybody's okay with this? And people don't even care about the discount because they don't feel like they're losing something. They're just not getting the extra benefit. And it's all about how you're using language. And this happens all the time. In fact, they passed a law about this. After 30 years, they had to repeal the law because some people are like, no, we don't want to lie to our customers. But, we get lied all the time. So these are models of language too, and if you know how to use them, you can actually see the utility value of understanding language and modeling language. I'm not saying go and do that business. I'm not saying go and lie to people. But apparently, once you understand something fully, you can start controlling it. And I guess that's the quote-unquote existential crisis moment. How do we turn this into something useful or something that has some real tangible effect and result and so on and so forth? Good or bad, that's a different problem. People who invented the atomic bomb didn't want to use it against humanity, but eventually people did. That's a different question. So here's a few more questions, and then I want to try to wrap up. Hopefully, sorry if this is too boring and too long. The question is, should we do theory in the age of LLMs? It looks like they're overtaking everything. It looks like they're doing very good linguistics. What do we want to do? And the answer is, of course, if we want to truly understand human language. Right? LLMs are great. You give them some data, they learn it really well. But it's essentially like lighting a fire, a huge bonfire. You heat up, it's good, it's useful, but we don't fully understand how they work. Even if we understand how LLMs fully work, we don't really understand how the human brain works and how the actually human language works. So if we want to understand human language, we need to keep modeling, keep asking the same question. How does it work? And this, we don't have to be dogmatic. We don't have to just follow the Chomskyan grammatical models. You know, some of us who are trained in that field, this is the best thing that we know, and this is the best thing that we can do. We're going to keep doing it. But you, young linguists, don't have to follow our footsteps. In fact, you should not. Otherwise, we're just going to produce the same thing that our forefathers and foremothers did. We need to do some progress. So we need to also model language through neural models or some other tools that we don't know yet, right? So there's too many things to learn. Also, a lot of LLM work actually rests on linguist input. At some point, more than 100 linguists used to work at Google. Do you know what they did? They fixed grammars. That's what they did. They're still working there. They're all testing the behaviors of LLMs and training them to be better. What are they using? They're using our linguistic modeling. They're testing to see if a language model understands implicatures, entailments, contradictions. They're testing to see if language models understand temporal reasoning. They're trying to see if we can really make sure that a model understands very weird questions about what happened between the 7th minute of a soccer game until the second red card. So this is a lot of complex temporal logic, and for that you need a model of language. Which modeling framework should we choose? Should we be Chomskyan, something else, connectionist? Well, I guess for a while, if you want to be successful and if you want to do the next thing, you have to be bilingual. You have to learn them both. You have to at least understand what they do and whether you can transfer one tool into the other, whether you can merge them together, or at some point we realized that Chomsky was completely wrong in terms of modeling, not theoretically. I think theoretically he's right. Modeling-wise, he was wrong. Let's use something else, right? That's our goal. So what's the future like? What's going to happen 50 years from now in linguistics? To be honest, I don't know. I'll retire by then. It's up to you. Unless I get fired, then there's no retirement plan. So the question is, what's going to be the refrigerator moment for linguistics? And it looks like there's many dimensions across where we could make real progress, only if we really understand how language works. Right? There's a lot of gains to be made in the healthcare domain. We can treat aphasia. The brain is there. Language is there. It works. We just need to fix it. How do we fix it? We don't know. Yeah, the LLMs speak well, but how do we go back and fix that, right? So there's a lot of, maybe at some point we're going to have pharmalinguists. We can build better language models. You know, if you take a look at the current language models, they're very good in certain respects, but they're actually terrible in terms of efficiency. I mean, they should learn from less data. They should make better generalizations. They should align well with our linguistic universals, patterns, right? So if you take a look at the data size comparison of a 10-year kid, they roughly see 100 million words. If they're lucky, if they're from a high income family. It's dramatically smaller if it's a low income family. GPT-3 was trained on 200 billion tokens, words. Llama, which actually sucks as a model, was trained on 2 trillion tokens. Are you kidding me? That has to become this to be in any way a conceivable model of human language. That's not human language. So there's a lot to be learned here with modeling. Go ahead. What up?
I think the token, etc. That discussions really missing the point that communication or language is not only about the exact words or sentences we say. It's more also about the social communication, social interaction between friends.
Of course.
Yeah, where is that data? You know, and it will never
It's here.
be in the LLMs anyway.
Here we are. No, it can be.
How?
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's your job to figure it out. I'm a technician. I move things around. We jiggle.
I mean, that's the point. We must jiggle, and jiggling is not there.
Jiggling is good.
Yeah.
You know, can we talk to birds? Can we talk to dolphins? They do goddamn communicate amongst themselves. Can we figure that out?
I think
That's
they
like a
also need to
language
figure
of
out.
some sort.
I think they need to also figure out.
The dolphins?
Yeah, or birds.
Yeah.
They need to figure out,
Yeah.
they need to get their shit together first. There's actually an interesting project going on at University of Berkeley where they've been trying to understand the dolphin speech using neural nets. I don't have a Twitter account anymore, so I can't follow it, which makes me super happy. This is what I want. Okay? So every linguist in this room, this is what I want because I can't learn German. And I want this to happen. So truly, if we really understand how the material works and everything, we ought to be able to open up the brain and inject some language in there. It's goddamn there. Or maybe a language transplant.
Yeah.
Donate your language. Donate our hearts. You know, why can't we just peel that up? No, this looks like science fiction. Super science fiction, obviously. He doesn't understand science fiction. That's a different story. But yeah, I think this is, in a sense, the ultimate goal. If you want to be utilitarian, if you want to just learn how the brain works, how the language works, and inject people's minds and connect them all to the matrix. And I guess exploit them all the time. There is always that danger, and there's always serious problems about science, the kind of knowledge that we generate, and the kind of people that want to use it and abuse it. I don't know if there is a solution to it. It looks like the humankind is doomed to pull a nuclear trigger at some point. But hopefully we can also be aware of these issues about how the models that we're generating are used. All right. Wrapping up. Without a good model, we cannot fully understand language. If we want to fully understand it, we need a good theory, many good models, and one of them is going to be more useful than the other. No understanding, no control. And you don't have to pick a particular model, just go at it, right? And you should always be prepared to change everything that you've assumed so far and shift to a different perspective. But notice that scientific knowledge is cumulative. right? So the way we look at knowledge, the way we understand it changes, but the things that we unearth, the data, the observations, they're going to live on. And we're still at the very early days of linguistic understanding. It took us 500,000 years to understand how heat works and fire works. A much simpler problem than the very complicated brain, which is a complex mush. So there's still more to be done. Go for it. Thank you very much. Karışık var mı? If you have any questions, I'll be happy to take. If you don't have any questions, let's get away from here.
Are there any questions?
Yes, sir.
Sorry to be a little long, but I'll start my question down to give some details. Do you think that today linguists and other people who look at linguistics, they are too worried about applications and utility? I should give some details. What I was thinking about was mathematicians have been creating their own universes and writing their own rules for hundreds of years, and they've been coming up with things to do, and they've been getting paid for it for hundreds of years. And their motivation was just aesthetic joy that they get from proving something. Why can't we just do that in linguistics?
Oh, I can. I don't know about you.
What about utility?
You just have to find a sponsor. You have to persuade the society. That's one aspect of it. The other thing is that it looks like mathematics has been a bit more useful in other fields. It serves other fields,
Only
right?
by
So
luck.
Yeah.
only by luck,
Maybe
maybe.
like 1% of mathematics.
Yeah. But you have to persuade the society, right? Why do we do? There's always an incentive structure in any kind of human action, whether it's individual or collective. There's some incentive structure. You have to have some motivation to do certain things, right? Obviously, for scientists, it's because they're curious, right? We're weirdos in that sense, and only a small fraction of the society has that weirdness and also the luxury. It's a luxury, to be honest, right? And of course, we don't know what's going to happen in the long term. We can only do our work now and hope for the best. That's exactly what happened with the LLMs. When they first built the perceptron, I think in the 50s, and then they tried modeling some phenomena with it, with some neural nets. They were terrible models, right? So for 60 years, poor Jeff Hinton and Macaulay and Pitts. In fact, Pitts didn't even have enough money to get by. I think he died in poverty, right? So, and many people mocked them, including linguists. There was this big fight between the Chomskyan camp, the generative symbolic camp, and the other camp, and many people didn't believe them. And I don't think they expected much. They just wanted to keep pushing it. And all of a sudden, some weird computer engineer group at Google built this transformer architecture, building on that 60 years of research. And they didn't make much money out of it. They just put the architecture out there. Then OpenAI comes in and says, okay, here's a hammer. Let's hammer around. Let's pour a lot of data in this. Let's put trillions of parameters in here and give it a shot. And it worked. And now we have this huge economy of LLMs and AI and so on and so forth. But we should notice that it's going to stop at some point. Because in a sense, we actually do understand what LLMs are doing. They are very simple next word prediction models. It's going to stop at some point, right? So it actually had sort of hit a ceiling. A couple years ago, that was the reason why I shut down my Twitter account. Every week you would see a major breakthrough in LLMs and AI research. LLMs can do this. LLMs can cook for you. LLMs can jiggle for you even. Now it's sort of it's at the ceiling. It's sort of settling down. What that means is that we should ask other questions. We should ask other challenging questions. So in all these respects, I agree with you. I think as the students of a field, what we should realize is that in that huge timeline, we're just a little piece of dust. And if you're interested, you should keep working on it. It will bring you success one way or the other. If you're not interested, if you want the utility value in the short term, this may not be the right thing for you to do. Or you have to think about how to build refrigerators with linguistic knowledge that you have. In other words, go into marketing, go into advertisement business, go into politics, or go serve the LLM world and help them make their models better. Yeah.
When you were talking about the models, like the generative models versus the LLMers,
Yeah.
you mentioned that the LLM guys who built the perception and whatever,
Yeah.
they have used some certain neural parameters, and you said that you could ask after.
Yeah.
I was curious what those are.
So how does the large language model work essentially? That's sort of like the idea is that, so I have some slides that are in Turkish that I use somewhere else. I can quickly show that. Do you guys, who knows how an LLM works?
Very superficial.
Some people. Essentially, an LLM has this very interesting idea of trying to predict the next word. And so, assume that you have this word, kırmızı, right? And you have a bunch of words that can follow this. And what an LLM does is that for each word, in a particular context, it assigns some probabilities to words. So you pick the right one. So in this kind of configuration where you have kırmızı and then kız başlıklı yoğurt, it looks like başlıklı should be following, right? So that seems to be the best candidate. And that's what an LLM tries to do. LLM tries to predict this word. Once you put that kırmızı başlıklı, and now your parameters are dynamic, now you want to get something like kız or something like that, right? So not kırmızı başlıklı or kırmızı başlıklı yoğurt or yedi, right? So that's what you want to do. And you keep doing it, right? So the goal of an LLM is to do that prediction. But how does it do it? Right? So there are many, many different ways of calculating the probability of a word occurring in a particular position based on what has been given. The simplest version is n-grams. Some of us are familiar with them. We just talked about them in class today in one of my classes. Large language models are a lot more complex than this. What they do is the following. Here's the problem with language, right? In language, it looks like in the previous example, we saw that başlıklı depends on kırmızı, kız depends on kırmızı başlıklı, and then the next word depends on kırmızı başlıklı kız, yoğurt, yedi, right? So it goes on like that. Every word, or every couple of previous words, feed into the next one. But language is a bit more complex, so if we take a look at this one, sen dün kitabı Ayşe'ye yedin, verdim, vereceksin, verdin. It looks like the decision is verdin. How does that get to be decided? And it looks like each piece contributes to that decision with a certain amount of weighting. Right? So Ayşe'ye, here's the dative. Dative tells us that it has to be some sort of a verb that gives you a trajectory. So it can't be yedin, it can be one of these things. Then dün is going to tell us that it has to be something that's past. So it can't be this one. So we have these two options. And then finally this one tells us that it has to be second person and not first person. That's how we choose it. That's a linguistic problem, and that is a very abstract level of modeling how language works. Okay? That's modeling. We just modeled language together. But now, how do we implement this? How do we figure out a mechanism that gives us the right weights? And even more importantly, how do we build a system that just learns this from the data? We don't have to hard code it. These slides, I had to hard code them. I need a machine that does this automatically. And for that, they use this goddamn machine. This is a perceptron. This is a model of this thing. That's a neuron, ladies and gentlemen. That's your brain. Somewhere in there, there's something like this, a cell. And what the neurons do is that they're interesting beasts. They're connected to other neurons. Electric signals pass through these synapses, right? And once enough electric signal is accumulated, they fire. Otherwise, they don't. That's what a brain neuron does. Fire or don't fire. Now, when does it determine when it should fire or not? Right? So all of these signals coming from different sources, they sort of add up, and there's some algorithm in there that makes a particular neuron fire at a particular point. So taking this analogy, McCullough and Pitts designed this thing, which looks very much like a neuron. It's connected to other neurons. It's connected to other pieces of information, right? And then each one of them has a particular weight. This one contributes 20%, this one contributes 20%, 10%, 50%. It looks like this particular piece is going to provide a lot of signal. That's most important. This one is less important. Anyways, you bring all of that signal, you sum them up, and then you pass it through some function that says, okay, you've reached a threshold, you can fire, or you haven't reached a threshold, you don't fire. That's what a simple artificial neuron does. That's a real neuron, that's an artificial neuron built by analogy. Now what they have noticed is that if you stack hundreds of those, or if you actually stack millions of those, or if you actually stack billions of those, they do excellent things like being LLMs or being self-driving cars or being AI models, right? So each of these nodes here, right, is a neuron. Each of these neurons are connected to other neurons by some parameters, which allow them to fire or not. And the entire goal of the system is to learn Sen dün kitabı Ayşe'ye verdin by associating a certain weight with this word, a certain weight with that word, a certain weight with this word, a certain weight with that word. And all of these weights are going to be calculated through this. And it's going to say, this one has the highest probability, this one has the next high probability, this one has a very low probability. That's how a large language model works. And this is called deep learning. Why is it called deep learning? It's a very silly idea. It looks like what we mean by learning. What do we mean by learning? Learning is setting these parameters, right? You take a word, you try to predict the next word using these parameters. If you make a mistake, you go back, you fix those parameters, you try again. You try again. You try again until you get the right parameters. When you use a bunch of these together, this is called a layer. You start seeing some interesting patterns. When you stack a bunch of these layers, this becomes a deep neural network. 2 layers is deep enough. Or enough to call it deep. It's not deep enough, it's enough to call it deep. And you can go as many levels of depth as possible. What they have observed is actually the following. The bigger this network is, the more parameters that you put in there, the more complex patterns the system is able to learn. And as you go from this layer to that layer, people have observed that this layer is very much close to the actual signal. As you go further and further, you learn more and more abstract concepts, more abstract representations are happening. So maybe you can think of this as these 2 layers as a model learning and representing syntax. That's semantics, and it goes on like that. So, I guess that's it. Does that answer your question-ish?
Yeah.
In a sense. All right. With that, I guess everybody is about to have a molten brain.
Okay. So
Okay.
if there are no more questions, then thank you once more.
Thanks.
For
Thank
coming.
you.